full-grown scholar, right? So it takes time. I've been impressed by your understanding and knowledge about Central Asia. But that's basically some of you only presented the broad outlines of the paper in 5 minutes, 7 minutes. But then Central Asia happens to be very specific area studies. Basically, it depends on your interest in which area that you like to do your research on. Right? In case you choose to work on Central Asia, first thing that you have to do is to try to learn the language. And it will be easy to learn Russian language. Easy in the sense, many universities do offer Russian languages. Because given the decade-old relationship that India has shared with almost Soviet Union. And CEC happens to know so many languages. So you can speak English, Hindi, understand Bengali. So to become an expert, you try to learn the language and it will be easy to learn Russian. Next, if you're interested, you still can try to learn Turkish. Turkish is also quite easy to learn. Because the Turkish script is like the Latin script. Okay, it's not an Arabic script. And they have all these English words. Very, very easy. And the Turkish government of late has been scholarship for non-Turkish students to go to Turkey and learn language for 3 months. So very important. Why I am saying why it is important? Because when we talk about the relationship, basically we tend to see other country from our perspective. And we thereby be a little selfish. Because we don't care what the other country thinks about us, what that country's requirements are. You understand? It's like a typical Western American perspective. Okay, oh, we are very powerful and doesn't matter what the requirements of Indians are. Requirements means geostrategic, geo-economic requirements, whatever cultural uniqueness that country possesses. It doesn't matter to America or to Western European countries, even for the matter to an extent to former Soviet Union. Because that kind of system is very different. You have a actually block divided world. So basically, if you are either of the two camps, if you are in Russia, American side, obviously you become the enemy of Russia, of the Middle. So that particular perspective framework has changed. I understand it. Okay. So whenever we had any problem that time, during the Cold War decades, India, Pakistan, India, China, every regional conflict would be seen from a broader perspective as the part of a larger conflict at the system level, that is between West vis-a-vis East. Very clear? So now that particular framework of looking at the global politics, okay, the East-West binary perspective got dissolved with the end of Cold War. So that end of the Cold War in a way gave us the strategic space. This middle level country like India, Pakistan, say Brazil, Indonesia, to manipulate because the space was not available before. And each country had a strategic identity because of its closeness proximity to either of the two competing global powers. Now that is gone. So you have the space you can expand your relation with other countries without being inhibited by your ties with either of the two global powers. Because it's no longer there. You are free to move any direction. So there came, that particular turning point came the diversification of relation of countries like India, which happened to be middle power, which is also called middle regional power. Because you, on the basis of realpolitik, from a realpolitik paradigm, on the basis of resources available in the country, you have a hierarchy of power. You have a big power. You have a number of countries which you can locate in the middle. They are called the middle powers. They are called the middle powers internationally. And regional power in a particular region. India, for example, is a middle regional power. So that space was available to us from 1991 onwards, but we took time to expedite the relational ties with the Central Asian Republic. There are opportunities, but we just because of a variety of factors, because of internal domestic politics like the 90s. So we are not in a position immediately seize that opportunity in the early 90s. Okay, that basically opportunity arose in Central Asia after the creation of the 5 Central Asian Republics with independent entities. These countries never had a movement for independence. Independence was thrust on them. तुम लो ऐसे कभी नहीं हुआ हिस्ट्री because they are not interested in attaining independence. Independence thrust on them because their leadership didn't know how to handle. Independent हो गए, but how to start a new state? This, try to understand the state making is a huge challenge. We are still struggling with the state building process even today after 70 years of independence. What is the basic ideology of India? Neo-Indian secularism or our cultural nationalism? The struggle is too long, isn't it? Because either way you expect many things, because you need to build up your own narrative. If you just, I will give you an example. Until recently, when you was reading literature related to India, Central Asia, all the time people talk about the Sufi sect had come from there, Babur had come from there, and Al-Burani. You hear a different narrative today. Here the emphasis shifted from medieval to early ancient Indian time. What kind of cultural relation India had with those republics before the advent of Islam? I think that you understand what I am saying. So these countries are today trying to basically identify the sources of the new identity. The Kazakh identity, for example, look at the demographic composition. It is 60-40. Slavic population, Russian population, 40%, 60%, the Turkic population. So what I am telling you here, these countries also are trying to force an identity which will appeal to all sections. Because these countries were artificially created by none other than Stalin. So there is a possibility of inter-ethnic conflict, particularly in Southern America. So what I am saying, trying to tell you, these countries today are struggling to form a stable, cohesive state, structurally as well as ideationally. That is the idea of Kazakh state, idea of say Uzbek state. Okay? And that's one, and there are limited resources. Okay? You say they are rich in mineral, not all of them. To great extent Turkmenistan, yes fine, rich in gas. Some state may be having some minerals. And third is the accessibility. They have the old gas pipelines from the Caspian, is basically built with the Russian, the Soviet era pipelines. So you want to rebuild the pipeline, it involves $1 billion. I try to understand that. Then third is investment. So what I'm saying, on the board, some of you presented very well, but you have to sometimes verify the facts. Somebody mentioned that Kazakhstan, US contribution. US is out of picture since it was supposed to close on based in Uzbekistan. It's no longer an actor anymore. And in Kazakhstan, basically today is struggling hard to somehow maintain, how do they say this? The balance between, on one side, Russia, China, and then on the other side, West. Because it's really interesting to join the Western European multilateral forums, even to the extent the European Union also, not exactly European, some other form. Doesn't want to sever its ties with Western European countries, but is nevertheless dependent on Russia. So Russia, even till date, remains the key player in Central Asia. So Central Asia, as such, you could read article, are going to decolonization. Nothing for the post-Soviet decolonization has not started. Russia continue to dominate. Read this opinion poll survey regarding the general opinion about Russian involvement in Ukraine war. Majority say Ukraine is at fault, not Russia. Okay? Among the Kazakhs, among the Kyrgyz. So they here, these are the realities. On the one, what you do is, as my submission cut the story short, when you look at our relation to other countries, you need to first study those countries' requirements, locational advantages, and locational disadvantages. What is the state of the, the state of what is stateless, or what stage that country is in terms of state building. Is it cohesive, stable, strong, or it is simply quasi-state with Afghanistan, for example? You know the concept of quasi-state? State which are internally not sovereign, but externally sovereign because they are represented in the United Nations, they have independent airlines, and some universities symbolically representing sovereignty. So they exist as sovereign state not because internal stability, but because external recognition. So they are only quasi-sovereign, quasi-states. So there could be quasi-states. They exist because the regional players want that particular country to exist. So what I'm saying, these are the countries which have gone through periodic upheavals. Latest was in Kyrgyzstan, which is close to China. And prior to the Tajikistan, you had a longer conflict with Islamists and the so-called secular response in Tajikistan. So what I'm trying to tell you there is, we need to first find out the location. What were their limitations, politically and economically? Equally important for us. And nature of leadership, very, very important. It is theoretically called the essential factor. Only if you look at the structure, your explanation will be incomplete if you do not take into account the essential factor or the leadership quality skill. Who is the leader? What kind of charisma that leader carries? If you compare today's leadership in India with the leadership of the last Prime Minister, you see a hell of a difference. So you can't, the structure remain the same. But what makes a difference and which will have a differential impact on the consequences, impact on the policy in the center, is the kind of leadership you have. I get what I'm saying? Leadership is very important. It's not simply structural. The essential factor is equally important. So who is the leadership like? Whether in Tajikistan or in Uzbekistan, whether they have any kind of special feeling for India, or any special priorities for India. This is equally important. Okay, so what I'm saying here is for the leadership ideal spaces. So what is important for you is, one, the structural factor, number two, the essential factors. As regards India's relation with specific country, whichever region that country is located, whether Sri Lanka or Uzbekistan in Central Asia. One. Second is, when you come to regional approach, perspective of a country like India, Central Asia first. Here, all the countries together, you have to see what are India's requirements, what is India's objective, and how this region presents to India. Most important thing is here is the three aspects you have to keep in mind. India also towards the region. One, geostrategic. Number two, geo-economics. Number three, geo-culture. So you have to place this three intersection of these three perspectives. Equally important in the post-Cold War decades. Geostrategic, geo-economics, and geo-culture. Geo-economics specifically important, which involves the resources, investment, connectivity. The cultural aspect, which we have been often harping on this, it doesn't create the best for relations. The international politics is largely grounded on real political imperatives. मेरा पास क्या है, मैं क्या दे सकता तुम्हारा पास क्या? And all the countries are extremely greedy. Okay, they are never content with accumulation of power. What is the BRI project of China? Is basically ultimate culmination of the surplus power that China had accumulated since the early 1980s. China happened to be the major beneficiary of the rapprochement with the West way back in 1970s following the visit of Kissinger. So China accumulated so much wealth through the economic liberalization and say late 1980s onwards under Deng Xiaoping. So that money, the capital, has to be invested somewhere. And BRI is an outcome of that, and it is the means through which China could expand its geostrategic influence. That can be justified through what China claims its own imagination of the global system. Okay, it is called the Chinese concept of Tianjin. When China would be at the center, all other countries would be linked to China at the center as subordinate state. It is a kind of, they have come out a new international relation perspective. It's called the Chinese perspective international relation, and the centerpiece of their perspective is called relational. Okay? So what I'm saying here is, once you have the capital, you can twist and turn things. That's what exactly China is doing. So what is so-called geocultural? Geocultural only is a factor to legitimize, to rationalize, to reinforce, to reproduce, but it is not the means to strengthen relations. It's basically these scholars trying to manipulate the history culture, either to oppose a country or to support a country, to treat a country a friend or an enemy. जब इंडिया पाकिस्तान रिलेशन आएगा, अरे we are great nation, गंगा यमुना, गंगा जमुना भाई भाई दोस्तों क्या दिक्कत? अरे we are born of this but then when you want to protect the country is a hostile neighbor, we should take out other facts from history, isn't it? So history here is used as a rationalizer, as a legitimizer. So history is basically depicts how we present it as intellectual policymakers to justify a specific set of action or decision of the government. Am I clear? Sure, thereby, language history is very important. They do create a base, but not a sufficient base to expand the ties. It may serve in sustaining the ties. I get your point. So what is very important for us, but then nevertheless, when this fact is not favorable, okay, in India's relation with Central Asian Republic, I mean one or two countries, what we can do, we continue with our efforts to maintain that cultural base, okay, and at least to sustain the development of sentiments, pro-Indian sentiments that exist in many Central Asian countries at the peoples to people level. That we can actually ensure it remains as it is, okay, by inviting them to come to India, get exposure, we go there, talk to them, so translate our scriptures and other things into the Russian language, Turkish language, so reach out to them. They continue to appreciate our gestures, appreciate our culture. That is, but then that is okay, but not sufficient. Not sufficient because of the ideal point. Not sufficient to enhance, elevate our ties. Because other factors which are important, they flow from geostrategic and geoeconomics. Hence, that explains why China continues to leverage over us. Russia continues to call the shots in Central Asia because it happens to be the power in Central Asia, because consider the Central Asia as the backyard. Okay. Doesn't want any other country to chip in. Okay. But then Russia today has the compulsion to go along with China. Look at the arms which have been provided by Chinese side to Russia to continue nearly 3-year-old war against Ukraine. Okay. And Chinese have gone very close to Russia. So let me complete what is likely to happen in the near future. It's not I'm not an astrologer, but based on the understanding global, complicated global politics, Americans today are trying hard what they call a strategy called the reverse Kissinger. It means Kissinger was a great diplomat who was solely responsible for building the rapprochement between China and the United States of America way back in the 1960s. When China and Russia were on the Soviet Union were at war, there will be the first time use of nuclear weapon after World War II. Okay. The Soviets started threatening to use nuclear weapon against China. So that is the time the Americans extended their hand and it was reciprocated by the Chinese. back in the 60s. China was worse than us. China was worse than us. Read the book, as this book is titled by the American novelist, The Wretched of the Art. That's the book where you find the description of China in the 50s and 60s. See, Chinese, the number of people who died in the Chinese Revolution, 4 million in the Cultural Revolution. 2.53 million people died during Japanese invasion. हमारे यहाँ पे ज़्यादा लोग मरे नहीं, टेररिस्ट ज़्यादा मरे, ज़्यादा बात से नहीं मरे. वो लोग they made huge sacrifice. So they do not mind, sacrifice another 1 million, 2 million people. So what I'm saying here is that China took off in 60s and 70s. It took next 25 years to emerge as a global economic power. Okay. So what the Americans are today trying to break this entente or the close nexus between China and Russia. Because Americans do know they cannot take on the two together. I get your point. So the President Trump is very smart. He knows it's very difficult on the part of America to take on both. One is military power, second is economic power. So it is trying to use diplomacy to the so-called the tariff war to break that alliance, the partnership, to fracture it. So there is a division among the policymakers in New York, Washington today, whether President Trump will succeed in doing it or not. So that explains why American President is prepared to sacrifice the interest of Ukraine by saying, you are at fault. And that has created division between America and the Western Alliance. For the first time, you have the division within the Atlantic Alliance. Between the European, West European countries on the one side and America on the other. The West European countries led by France have already promised to give $1 billion to Ukraine. But they do not have the arms. And understand, it's a very complex situation today. And that restricts the space for us. Despite all our stripes and efforts to have access to Central Asia, our efforts largely are conditioned and contingent on the relationship among the three great powers. So regardless of what you do, extremely difficult to have an access into Central Asia, either through Iran or through Afghanistan. Because that's again largely held hostage to kind of relationships between China, Russia on the one side, United States of America on the other, and another point of the conflict in the region is China as well as Iran and United States of America over this nuclear issue. So as long as Iran is under the crippling sanction, very difficult on part of Indian policymakers to make this, the Jihad effective. So these are sort of limitations, the structural limitations, very important for us to keep in mind. Thank you so much for your interest and academic interest and academic efforts to know, to understand and explain the complexities of what the relationship between India and Central Asia. I wish you all the best. Thank you.